Hey guys, how's everyone doing? Today's project is this Craftsman single stage 4-stroke snowblower. Just picked it up last night at after dark. Didn't really get a good chance to look it over yet. He said that it does run, but it runs a little bit rough. And he did show it to me running, and it ran pretty good initially, and then it started to kind of surge a little bit, run a little bit rough. But now that I'm just bringing it around here to this side, I can see, as you can see, it's actually leaking fuel from the carburetor area. So there's definitely a carburetor issue. So I'm going to try and start it up, see if I can show you what it was doing yesterday, if it'll start, and then I'll bring it into the garage and we'll try and tackle this one. Alright, just check the oil. There's definitely some oil in there. We know there's fuel in there because it's leaking. So turn the key on, and the choke position looks like that. A couple shots of prime, and let's see what we get. Alright, so there you have it, guys. You can see it's running a bit rough. The chute control works. It looks like the auger is working. And if I can get this carb all fixed up, this is going to be a nice little machine for somebody. Might keep it for myself. So I'm going to take you in the garage now, and we'll continue on in there. Alright guys, so I got you up inside here on my cart. You can see there I got some cardboard down, and it's definitely still leaking some fuel. There we go. Got the key. Don't want to lose that for sure. Top panel comes off, and there's probably wiring for a key switch and some tubing for the primer, and then this guy comes off the bottom here, just slides out. Now let's go through a few reasons why this thing will actually start to leak. Well, one could be a fuel delivery issue. You could have a leaky hose from the tank, or there's no clamp or something that's causing it to leak right here at the connection or the fitting. So that could be one issue. Another issue could be on the bottom here. You have a bowl nut and there's a gasket. So you could have a bad gasket. Maybe the bowl nut is not tight. Another thing could be that this bowl has a rubber O-ring where it attaches to the base of the carburetor. That could be bad. And another reason is it has a bad needle or seat, depending on what style of needle and seat this has. If it's not meshing together, it's not mating together, then it's going to constantly be allowing fuel to enter into the carburetor, and then it's going to leak out. So first thing you gotta do is take off this little air filter type thing. It's more of a screen. 5/16. So this is 5/16 or 8 millimeter, guys. I'm gonna keep that stuff together. Alright guys, so I do see a bit of crud. You could probably see that kind of cruddy white stuff kind of flaking off here. There's a little port right there that's all gunked up and caked over. So this definitely needs a carb clean. Alright guys, so if it's leaking around this float bowl on the bottom here, then there could be a problem with that gasket. If it's leaking more from the intake side of the carburetor, if it's kind of leaking out through here, that would indicate more of a needle and seat issue, because what's happening is this bowl is filling up and the seat is not sealing to shut off the fuel coming from here. So this keeps filling up, and instead of shutting off at the appropriate time, it's not sealing properly, and fuel is constantly coming up, and it actually coming up and into, it's hard to see in here, but there's an emulsion tube in there, and it'll start to slowly just seep out of that emulsion tube, and it'll either, depending on if it's leaning a little bit that way, it'll keep leaning and going into the intake and maybe into the cylinder, and if the oil smells like gasoline, that would be an indication that a needle and seat is not working properly. Otherwise, if it's coming out this way, it's just because the carb is maybe tilted a little bit more this way as opposed to that way. It's the same thing, same reason. I'll go back to my trusty fuel line pliers, clamp, whatever you want to call it. Alright, next, try and get this fuel line off. Prefer not to wreck the fuel line, but alright, there we go. Oh geez, those are pretty loose. Alright, looks like there's a little insulator between, like a gasket and an insulator of some sort between the carb and the intake of the engine. So if that comes off, just keep in mind where it goes. I think I'm going to just disconnect this key switch. Alright. Prefer not to wreck the gaskets. Like I said, there's a gasket back there, then there's this insulator. Now we have to work on this throttle linkage. So it looks like it's not a Z-bend, but I'm going to take this spring off first, and I know it's been worked on because this spring looks like it's been bent by someone else taking it off. And then I'm just going to try and, unfortunately, got to pull out the throttle and try and wiggle the linkage off here. There we go. And here's the gasket on the back side. Alright guys, so we're up on the bench here now. First thing I want to do is test this needle and seat. I use a Mighty Vac pressure and vacuum tester. And I just hook up one end of the line to the fuel intake. Now, this is probably going to leak a little bit of fuel when I dump it upside down, which it does. But in this upside down position, the float should be all the way up, which would simulate the bowl being full of fuel. In which case, what we're going to do is pressurize this to make sure the float, which is attached to the needle and seat, should close off the fuel when it gets up this to the high position. So it should hold pressure when I pressurize the needle and seat here. So I pressurized it to about 6 psi, and it actually looks like it's holding pretty good. So to me, that means I think we can kind of eliminate the needle and seat. It's holding pressure. Alright guys, so now I got you up here. Also wanted to show you this little bit of gunk here that I noticed earlier, right at this intake hole here. So definitely obviously something we got to get off. This might just need a general overall cleaning. So that's what we're going to do. We'll start off there, and hopefully that fixes our problem. Take off this float bolt, 1/2 inch. That didn't seem very tight. I just wonder if it was leaking fuel from there. This little gasket for this bowl nut is pretty wet. So the float, I always listen. That would be another reason why this could be leaking fuel. Is if this float is, it's like the float in your toilet. If it's full of water, or in this case gas, it will never actually float up high enough to close off this needle valve, which sits on the end of this arm. Okay, so normally it would sit like this if there's no fuel. As the fuel level rises, it raises the float, which pushes this needle valve down into the seat, closing off the fuel, which is coming in from the seat underneath here. So if this float actually doesn't float, if it fills up with gas, then it will never come up and shut off the fuel coming in. So that could be another reason. The next thing we're going to do is inspect this needle valve. Now on the end of this one in particular, it has a rubber tip. So what we're looking for at the end of this needle valve, that rubber tip, to make sure there's no deformations. A deformation would kind of show itself. You'd see a little line all the way around. If it was sitting in the seat for a very long time in the same spot, it would just deform that rubber tip and potentially not seal off. But I don't think that's our problem, because we tested this needle and seat previously and it actually tested out okay. Now inside here is that rubber gasket I was talking to you about, which the bowl sits like this. So this particular one, I'm just gonna potentially see if this is our problem. It does, I mean, look a little bit deformed. It's not cracked. The condition of it looks okay. There's a spot right here though, there is a little deformation, like it was put on when the gasket wasn't properly seated. So I'm going to take a look at that when I put it back, maybe put it back in upside down, see if that might help a little bit. Alright guys, so I finally got everything back together. We're just about ready to test fire this. It's been, I don't know, about 5 minutes I've had fuel in it, and I don't see any drips at all as of this point. So we're just going to try and get this thing sparked up and see how it runs. Alright, key on, choke is on. Couple shots of primer. That's good. Let's fire it up. Alright guys, so everything's running good. So all we need is just some snow to test drive this guy. But I think it's worked out pretty well. It's going to be a nice little snowblower either for myself or somebody else. So as always guys, if you enjoyed the video, please go ahead and hit the like button, and go ahead and hit the subscribe button and the notification button as well, just to make sure you're notified of all my new content that's coming out this year. And till next time guys, Take care.